ago won't buy much of anything here today.
And why the millennial generation is starting to give up because they can't afford to get a good job or own a house.
8 million Venezuelans voting for this assembly, saying it's actually less than 3.
It is. And people are going to start rioting in the streets.
Was reported to have asked Putin for military support that would help him stay in power.
We will make America safe again. And yes, together, we will make America great again.
And they ignore him. And 8 more years goes by till Bernie himself finally admits to his sons, hey, I've been running a Ponzi scheme.
Does its dominance mean it can use the alliance for its own ends?
Since 1981, bond yields, also known as coupon rates, have just gone down and down and down.
The Federal Reserve note will be your biggest financial liability.
Welcome to RTD Live Talk 935. This is the second live stream of the day, and today we have another guest joining us. So that's the first time I've had 2 guests in one day, but I'm looking forward to having a chance to discuss with this young man here. He's known as Brian the Banker, and at the request of you, the viewers, and so when you guys speak, I try my best to listen. So tonight I have someone joining us who called in, I think it was about a week ago, and just dropped a lot of bombshell knowledge on the audience, and so ended up having to do a second little video clip to share, and from there more people said have him on, so he's joining us tonight. And so before we get into the live stream of everything, I want to give it a minute before everybody tune in. And so if any new viewers watching us, let me know where you're chiming in from. Feel free to use the chat and let us know where you're chiming in from. And then also, if you have any questions, you want to ask any questions or pose any questions, feel free to use the number 1-833-LIVE-RTD, and we can get you on the air and have your voice heard. So other than that, we're going to dive into it. I'm excited to find out some of the things that happens behind the scenes. So let me bring in the gentleman tonight. And so Brian the Banker from Delaware is joining us. How you doing, Brian?
Hey, I'm happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, I appreciate you for joining me. And so, as I mentioned, prior to going live, it's the first time an actual viewer received requests from the viewers, from other people in the community to join the show. And so, definitely looking forward to getting your thoughts on the banking world, because you have a unique background and whatnot, we all can tell. So, wanted to dive into that. But before we get any further, who is Brian? How did Brian get into the line of work he's in now? Give us a little bit of your background to where you're at and how you arrived there today.
Yeah, sure. So growing up, I was always questioning things, and that sounds kind of cliche, but I really wanted to know how the world worked. And I started realizing, my parents worked for money, your cousins worked for money, your aunt, everybody's working for money. Nobody seemed to know or was good at money.
Yeah.
So I started looking into it, and I'm like, well, we spend our entire lives doing things for other people to get this paper. Really, what is this? Mm-hmm. And that led me down a pretty long rabbit hole, as many of your viewers, I'm sure, are aware. And I was actually very awake, and I went to college. I was probably a sophomore in college, and one of my roommates showed me a video on YouTube regarding the banking system. And it was actually, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. It was one of those cartoons about the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And I started reading a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. Actually, I got it from my college library. I was amazed they had it. Mm-hmm. And it was by Edward G. Griffith, I believe his name was. Yeah. And that really led me down a rabbit hole. And I was like, you know what? Like, if I know this much about banking and money at this age, more people in, not to sound facetious in any way, but I know more about banking than a lot of people, why don't I go into it?
Yeah.
So from there, I got my corporate finance degree, and I started working at one of the top firms in private equity. And private equity was great. I was in charge of setting up accounts, and I was promoted pretty quickly throughout the company, climbing the corporate ladder. And what really started me getting into banking, I worked a few years in fixed income for the United States Treasury Fed settlements for one of the top, too big to fail banks. Mm-hmm. And I started noticing a lot of things. I started noticing that the Fed was actually still buying tons and tons of treasuries. You're talking tens of billions of dollars a day in treasuries. And it wasn't advertised anywhere. This was after, quote unquote QE3 or QE2 or whatever QE they're on. So secretly, I knew that the Fed was actually still buying back treasuries. And on the plus side of that, I could see that countries were selling treasuries. Then I started to realize, okay, I know what's going on here. They're actually buying up these treasuries that other countries don't want to keep the rates low.
Now, let me ask you a question. Sorry to interrupt. Now, as far as the buyback aspect of these treasuries, is this within the last year, 2, 3, 4? Or what part of this career did you actually notice when this was taking place?
Probably like 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it's it's actually amazing how long they've been able to pull it off, because you're talking 3 or 4 years of tens of billions of dollars stealth bought treasuries a week.
Yeah.
So it's really amazing. I think they're starting to lose control at this point because, as you can tell, and I don't know if a lot of people have seen, but bond yields are rising pretty steadily as far as basis points.
Interesting. Now, one of the big talks that everyone says is when the yield curve inverts, then all hell breaks loose based upon prior indicators for recession. Is that really the case, or what are your thoughts on that? Is that something where you're looking forward to happen this year, next month? When do you see that kind of thing happening?
Well, it's really funny, not to not answer your question, but when you look at a treasury and say somebody wants to buy a $50 million 30-year treasury, the inflation actually doesn't even make it worth buying, because say you're getting 3% back on a 30-year treasury note. In reality, inflation every year is like, they say 2%, but probably closer to 7% a year. So you're actually losing money. So in reality, the whole treasury market's controlled by the central banks. But I think there's a line in the sand, a red line basically saying that if the treasury gets too high on the 10-year, stocks will begin selling off because they'll start yielding more. And I think I've done calculations. I think if the 10-year treasury reaches 3.25%, I think that really is going to cause the correction that the market's waiting for.
Now, will that be like an immediate, or this like usually takes 4, 5, 6 months for things to unravel, or what will be the time frame for that, in your opinion?
So in my opinion, if the 10-year hits 3.25, the market will begin selling off sharply, because that indicates that debt is costing more to service, and banks are going to feel the pressure, and they're already feeling the pressure on refinancing and home loans, because right now the 30-year mortgage average is pretty close to 5%, which is about the highest it's been in 10 years. The inversion is a little different, because if the yield curve inverts, if the 10-year yields more than the 30, I don't expect an immediate sell-off, but it's definitely an indication that a recession's coming. I mean, every time it's happened, it's followed.
Now, do you think that, the recession that's coming, because a lot of people use a variety of indicators that will reveal the fact that we've never really exited the last recession. They just more so papered it over. And so this recession that you're referring to that could come, if that happens, and it could be a massive sell-off right away, then would it then trickle into the equities and then, all types of other markets? And what are some of the dominoes that could trigger some other things that makes it obvious? Because, of course, they're going to try to paper it over, and it's not until it's usually too late that they come out and say we need to make some adjustments or make some type of bailout, bail-ins, or whatever. So what are some dominoes that could fall after that?
So in my opinion right now, there's 2 dominoes. Well, there's 3 dominoes. The first domino are the too big to fail banks, the Deutsche banks, the highly, highly derivative banks. As the LIBOR rate rises, which is the lending rate that banks use and charge each other for lending money, rises, the derivatives become more risky and more compromised. And honestly, if Deutsche Bank goes down, I think that's the linchpin. If it goes down, the whole financial structure crumbles globally. So that's one. Emerging markets is another one. As the dollar continues to get stronger, it takes more dollars to pay the debt that the emerging markets face. I think that's a big one. And the other one is the bond market. We've never had such an inflated bond market with so much paper chasing these assets, that if the bond market starts creeping up with these interest rates, it's going to be a disaster for the market. So I think those are the 3 main concerns at this time.
Right. Now, speaking of derivatives and Deutsche Bank, and so for the last several years of me really covering events that's happening in Europe, they've always been in the limelight because they have so much, and they stay entangled in so many other economies. Italy, Greece, all the pig nations is basically going belly up. Now, to my knowledge, they were just delisted from some major exchange over there and downgraded, and so they're barely hanging on to life over there. Now, do you think it's a chance that before that bank goes belly up to where it's obvious that the Fed steps in directly, or the EU steps in and a massive bail in Europe, or because I don't think they realize that how dangerous and how systemically dangerous that bank is. Do you think they will let it go that easily?
Deutsche Bank, I don't even look at it as a bank because they don't really have that many depositors. I look at it more of an investment bank. Yeah. They don't really have many depositors at all. They just make bets on the derivative market, and they hold tons of counterparty risk. I think the ECB will try to hold them up as long as they can, but it's a very interesting time because bank earnings are about to come out, and we all know Deutsche Bank earnings are going to be an absolute disaster while interest rates are rising. So it's kind of a convergence of, the perfect storm. I guess, I don't know. I think it's going to be a very interesting October for sure.
Yeah. So October. So basically in less than half a month in October is when the information comes out that you shared. And so that could be a key indicator as to whether or not we're able to get out of this year without something becoming obvious.
The thing about Deutsche Bank is it's too big to fail and it's too big to save.
Too big to save, yeah. Interesting. And so Deutsche Bank is right up there. So I know on the derivative side, I looked at some graphs a while back, and it shows our too big to fail banks here and how they're all interconnected. And I want to say, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, that JP Morgan Chase is probably the biggest as far as total exposure to derivative. I think it was like 42 trillion or something like that. I think one of our too big to fail banks were also tied into that. Now, if Deutsche Bank was to go under, how would then our banks respond with their exposure in the high trillions as well? Because I heard it's like somewhere around all banks total is a quadrillion or something they be saying. So not sure how that adds up.
Total obscene amount of money. And quite honestly, I think if JP fails, it's going to have the same effect as Deutsche. It's just, you're talking, tens and tens, multiples of trillions of dollars in these derivative bets that they can't meet their obligation. It's never happened before.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's use an example of what happens when a bank is insolvent or exposed for being insolvent the way they are. And so someone here actually posed a question. It says, ask him about Cyprus and the bank bail-in process. And so it's good to say if the banks are exposed for frauds as they are, then all the remaining depositors, what's going to happen to them? Give us some scenarios of what we will see possibly. And is Cyprus a good example of what will happen?
Sure. So one of the reasons I agreed to come on the show and, kind of compromise my anonymity was because I wanted to warn people to get some cash out of the bank, because the banks, I don't know if you know, I've reviewed the legal documents with counsel, but they have terms written into where they become secured creditors, where they can actually take your money. It's not your money anymore when you sign up for, say, an IRA account with Wells Fargo. They have paperwork in there that says they get paid first, which would be a bail-in.
Yeah.
So essentially, if shit really hit the fan, they could just claim that it's their money because you signed the paperwork, that the legal, and we all know law is based on contracts. So you signed the contract agreeing that that's their money, and they have to make you whole, but they have a very long time. And honestly, the FDIC can't cover everybody's loss.
Yeah, I just did a video last night in reference to just some of the total holdings in deposit financial institutions, and so I came up with just the current currency supply, which is 1.5 trillion, and then the total M2, which includes M1, M2, and savings deposit was 14 trillion. And so you factor in there's 1.5 trillion in physical paper on the planet, 14.9 just in the banking sector, not to include all the investment stuff on top. We're looking at a lot of money that people will not be able to get access to. Now, There's never been any type of thing prior to this other than Cyprus. And so one thing I always say is the possibility of making the depositors whole by then introducing some other form of payment method or actual shares in a bank. You think that's something that could be a possible scenario?
quite honestly, I wouldn't put it past anything they do.
Mm-hmm.
But my thing is, if there's a fire in an auditorium, you best get out first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the people that are listening to this, you know what I mean? Don't trust that they'll be able to deliver if they fail, because you're not first in line. You know, the Warren Buffetts and, you know, the 0.001% investors, they're going to be made whole long before we will.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Now, on the banking side, you know, the Fed, as you hinted at earlier, you know, next month can raise rates a little quarter point, as if that's going to, you know, it makes a difference because they're living up to their promise of potentially hiking several times in a year. But then we see with the side effects of that, it makes debt more expensive for everybody. Got to pay the debts back. Now, if there was another hiccup, do you see them being forced to go like actual nominally negative? Cutting rate,
negative. You're talking about negative interest rates.
Correct, like flat out cutting, going negative, and then from that, I hear about you know the incentive then is then for people to hold cash, and then they're gonna have problems with that, so then they got to remove cash and just laying out scenarios.
The only way they could go negative interest rates is if they removed cash. If they went completely digital payment systems, that the only choice you had was to hold money with them, they could charge you interest for holding it in the bank. But honestly, I don't see that being a peaceful transition, because what I find, even in my line of work, a lot of people are starting to wake up and they're starting to lose the deception and the veil that the economy's going great. You know what I mean? Everybody thinks it's going great because we've had tens of trillions of dollars printed on top of it and buying bonds and basically stocks and assets. But Main Street's not feeling that.
Yeah.
So when they lose control of the perception of the economy, that's when people are going to start going to pull their money out, and that's when banks are going to fail to deliver. Kind of like the COMEX.
Yeah.
It's all just an illusion.
Yeah. Now, speaking of COMEX, since you touched on that, you know, I haven't done much research on it, but of course, J.P. Morgan is supposed to be sitting on 400, million ounces of silver. You know, any thoughts towards why they are all of a sudden so heavy, why they've got their weight up so heavy at this particular time?
Well, you got to figure J.P. Morgan was one of the first banks that started the Fed. They're gonna cover their assets with physical, because they always have. I think J.P. Morgan will probably be one of the last banks to stand because they're so hedged against what's going on, and they get that. They have a full vault, and they control the silver markets along with other banks, HSBC. But I think you got to do what the people smartest in the room are doing. And I hate to say it, but JP Morgan, it's one of the most successful banks, means whatever, but they are buying silver in massive amounts right now. They know what's coming. They know that the dollar will eventually fail. It's losing its status around the world every day.
Yeah. Good one. I do agree 100%. And what I've noticed over the last 100+ years of just having read a couple history books and whatnot, I've noticed that every recession / panic, bank panic. And so if 08, 09 was a bank panic, there was a lot of bank closures, ideally Lehman Brothers or whatever, and Bear Stearns and all those other institutions went out. And so it looks like every crisis there's a shrinkage of the smaller commercial banks, and there's a growth of the too big to fail banks, to where now we're the biggest banks on the planet, 6 or 7 top banks. And so I after hearing what you're saying, I'm thinking about the fact that JP Morgan is heavily weighted down so they can withstand the storm that's about to blow through, to the point where they might end up becoming the number one too big to fail bank that's able to weather the storm and be the primary financial institution that is kind of runs the Western Hemisphere especially, but heavily influences Europe and everywhere else. What do you think about that?
And that might be a deal worked out amongst them. They know that eventually the system's going to fail. They might have just agreed to let JP Morgan take the reins. But they might even try to start the Fed over again by having the assets to back the new currency. Anything's in the air at this point.
Yeah.
But I know that JP Morgan wouldn't invest in silver unless they wanted the 10 times return.
Yeah.
So that's a great place to put your money right now, for sure.
Right. Okay. So we have a couple questions in the chat. And so for everybody who just might be tuning in, we have Brian the banker, who called in about a week or so ago and just did a great job of explaining some things. And so at your request, the viewers in the comment section, wanted me to get him back on, so he agreed to come on and share his thoughts and whatnot. So, Brian, it looks like we have in the chat a couple opinion questions to pose to you. So the very first one, it says, does Brian have an opinion on what the monetary system will look like after the collapse of the current system? Thanks in advance.
Well, okay, so there's a 50-50 shot either way. I really want to believe Trump, and I really want to believe that he's trying to make America great again, and I hope he's not just a puppet. But if he really wanted to help America right now, he would introduce a gold-backed or some sort of precious metal-backed dollar to bring things down. It would hurt a lot. It would cause valuations of the stock market to crash, but eventually you have to take your medicine. So I'm hoping that it becomes a gold-backed dollar and brings us back to reality a little bit and saves the country. The other option is, I'm sure a lot of other people have seen the Economist magazine cover of 1988, where they predicted a new currency for the world, where they're basically burning cash and a Phoenix coin arises.
Yeah.
I think that is kind of the cryptocurrency aspect of them buying and printing all this money to cause hyperinflation, and then introducing a new world order coin, if you will, which would be a cryptocurrency. So it's either that Trump is a good guy and he's going to put the US dollar back on gold, which I'm really hopeful for, or it's going to be going to a cryptocurrency type system, which the elites would obviously prefer, because then they could charge negative interest rates and basically tax everything that you buy.
Okay. So, Brian, we have a caller, so I'm going to put him online. Hello, caller. What's your name and where you calling from?
Hey, Mike. It's Michael from San Diego.
Michael from San Diego. How you doing this evening? What's on your mind tonight?
Hey, Mike.
Hey, I have a question. How are you guys? I have a question for Brian, since he's in the banking industry.
Yep, go ahead.
For the homeowners that are who own homes, say something happens to all these banks, then what happens to the homeowners on the other side?
Well, that's a very good question. I would hope that they would just dissolve your mortgage. I'm not really sure. Maybe a company would come in and buy your mortgage. But if you really want to get down to it, mortgages are kind of a fraud anyway, because banks don't really lend you any money. They kind of create the money using fractional reserve banking when you sign the application or the promissory note. The promissory note's actually the asset that the bank uses and then sells and rehypothecates. Basically, they sell it as a mortgage-backed security. So if you wanted to take them to court, they would have to produce that promissory note, which they can't because they've already sold. So you could take them to court and probably win for fraud, but I'm not really sure what would happen if the bank failed out. I assume that mortgage would get sold off.
Now, one thing I've heard before, based upon other crises that's happened in lesser developed countries, is that they just reevaluate or reassess the value of your mortgage loan to whatever that new currency or whatever that new system might be. So they're not gonna wipe it clean. They're just denominate it in that new currency or whatnot, which will reflect relative value of what it is now, which also could be done as well. So, but once again, it's never been done on a massive scale the way it is turning out to be right now. So
it would be very interesting to see
Right,
hundreds of thousands of homes.
I don't see them just forgetting about it, because there's millions of us. It's not just like a few people.
Right.
That'd be a huge loss for the banks.
Right, and the good thing is the banks are not in a position to lose out. They want to make sure they win, and so I could say we're going to end up having to pay everything off.
Did something, but it ain't helpful.
Yeah. But Mike,
I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
If that derivative bomb goes off, I'm not sure there's going to be many banks standing.
Yeah, that would be.
That's why I was just curious. Do we still mortgage, or do they just say your property's yours, or what?
Well, it would be great if they priced it back to gold and silver, because if I wasn't around back in the 50s and 60s, but I'm sure my grandparents bought their house for $50,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so,
right.
So when metals reevaluated for the true market rate at that point, then it could be easier to pay off that mortgage with no problem, hopefully, give and take if it's like some type of civilized time frame we're in, because it could be chaotic for quite a while, depending on how things play out. So. But, thanks for your call, my friend. Appreciate you. Thanks for calling in.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Mike. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting, because we've never a lot of this stuff is we're sharing our opinions. We're just going back and forth, going over scenarios of what could be, but yet, time will tell. Who knows? But it's good to cover a couple angles because one of these angles have to be similar to what might possibly happen. So, Brian, I appreciate you taking time to share your thoughts with us. So any more questions or calls out there, feel free to chime in. We'd love to get as many questions answered as possible. And so my thing is, let's talk a little bit about the whole crypto sector and the fact that cryptocurrency, by a lot of the older generation, is not really buying into it, but yet the younger generation is real excited about it because they believe it's going to, increase in value, and everyone has a chance of becoming richer than they are now in a speculative sense. So what are your thoughts on cryptocurrency? What, in your opinion, was it positioned for this particular time to ease some of the pain that's going to occur in the old financial markets, such as the equities, bonds, and things like that? As those tumble, some of that liquidity can rush into the crypto sector to absorb some of the losses a little bit, you think?
I've heard a lot of things about cryptocurrency. I've heard it was produced by Nokatashi Yakamoto. Sorry, I butchered that, but nobody knows who this guy is. I've also heard that the NSA or the CIA invented it. Who really knows, But I do know that I have a few Litecoin just on the possibility that it pops. I don't want to miss out on that. I don't really have too much Bitcoin. I saw the bubbleistic aspect of it, and I thought it was kind of a scam. I think I look at Bitcoin and Litecoin as gold and silver. Bitcoin is your gold. Litecoin is your silver. It's way cheaper. There's a decent amount more of it. But right now, I think that the earning potential on Litecoin is much greater than Bitcoin.
So you said the potential. So repeat that one more time.
Sure. So I look at Bitcoin as gold, and I look at Litecoin as silver. Silver is like $14. Litecoin, I looked last, I think it was like $60.
Yeah.
I have a few Litecoin. I think I have 10 or whatever. But if they go parabolic, then I win. You know what I mean? But I'm not going to put too much stock, literally, into cryptocurrency just because I don't like the way that it's digital. And if a power down scenario hits or something, you lose that money. I like physical precious metals myself.
Yeah, I do agree. Now, let's talk a little bit about the whole, have you come across or have you noticed anything in the banking sector to do with the developments out east? And so you mentioned a massive sell-off in treasuries or whatnot. Any hints or signs as to the development of the One Belt, One Road initiative, the things that's happening with China and Russia, their agreements, anything that come across the banking sector that might have caught your eye?
Japan was always one of our largest clients, selling and buying. The Japanese central bank, I do believe, I can't confirm it, but I think they definitely have some sort of agreement with the Federal Reserve. I know the Rockefellers were big out in Japan, and they kind of started the banking industry down there. So we were always dealing with Japan, and just recently, Japan has been selling off treasuries like you wouldn't believe.
Really?
And before it was always kind of a give and take, but now they're just kind of giving up. China's kind of the same way. China they say they hold the most debt. And really with these trade wars, if China wanted to fire off, they could just sell all their treasuries. So they always have that option. But as far as the One Belt, One Road, no, I wasn't really involved in that.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah, man, so it's interesting that you're able to share your experience based upon being a banker on the East Coast or whatnot. And so caller-wise, anybody have any more thoughts or any questions? Let's, just ask as many questions as we can now while we got Brian on the line. And so he's been generous of his time. So the goal was to get him on here 20, 30 minutes and have him share his thoughts and knowledge or whatever. And so we'll got a couple questions here. What, you got to say something?
Yeah, before I go, just cut me off if there's a question or anything. But before I go, I just kind of want to give you an overall sense of how I see it going down.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so right now interest rates are rising, and basically the Fed is not pumping liquidity into the system anymore. And I know that. I see a lot of treasuries being sold, so I know that they're not really quantitative easing anymore because they realize they kind of lost. There's nothing else they can really do. So I believe now they're kind of sucking liquidity out of the system. And it could go two ways, the crash. It could be a deflationary crash where the stock market just crashes, or it could be inflationary where they are secretly still buying and they're just going to drive the stock market to the moon and kill the dollar. The best thing to do, in my very personal opinion that I've done, is you want to go to the bank and you want to take out about $200 in 5s and 10s. Take out some.
Now, why 200? Is that just a personal preference, or any particular reason behind that number? Why not 1,000 or something like that?
You could, but 1,000 in 5s is, I think it's a little bit overdoing it, because the way I see it is if these banks do fail and they start to crash, they're going to freeze the system. It's going to be a complete credit freeze where your credit cards aren't going to work. You're going to want to have a little bit of cash on you. So at that point, when you have your 5s and 10s, if the supermarkets are still open and they're only taking cash, you're going to be in a good spot. As far as preserving wealth, in my opinion, silver is the buy of the century. I've read countless books and countless research on the potential of silver. And when you realize that the COMEX is completely manipulated, and a lot of those paper derivative contracts, they're not judging physical precious metals at all. It's just kind of adding, adding quantity to the COMEX. You're going to realize that a lot of those contracts can't be met. There's not enough precious metal in the world to meet them. And in my personal opinion, this is an investment advice, but you don't want to miss out on it if it happens. I think silver could have the potential to go to $700 or $800 an ounce.
Yeah, and according to all the paper and debt instruments in circulation, that's what it would roughly equate to according to the U.S. debt clock calculator. So that sounds about what it could be. But the question would then be, if it rose to $700, $800, $900, would you still want to exchange it? Would you still want to exchange it for depreciating, dying currency? Because I think one thing I try to remind people not to do is to base their future wealth in even using dollar terms, given the fact that, like in the Bolivar, it could be 50 million bolivars for one gold coin, but do you want 50 million pieces of paper that is probably going to go down in value even more? So I tell people, keep the mind frame of your holding metals for after there's some type of stability after a crash or a restructuring, and then probably going to look to buy tangible things directly, not exchange it for no more paper or digits, because like I think Jim Willie mentioned that there could be another scenario of another issuance of a currency, but in order for it to compete globally, it's going to be domesticated, and they're going to have to take it's going to have to take hits, which means that if we're measuring our dollar against some other global standard, it's going to be like, it could be 20 of the new dollar notes to 1 yuan or something like that, or however it could reevaluate to. But basically, at the end of the day, keep your metals for as long as you can, because it's your anchor in the storm itself. So, but that's just my 2 cents.
And just remember this: more millionaires were made during the Great Depression than any other time. Wealth isn't destroyed; it's transferred.
Yeah, good point. Very good point.
If you're in stupid assets and you're in depreciating, investments, you're going to lose, and the international bankers and the people that really control the money are going to win. They're going to take it from you. And it's really a shame, because I look at the baby boomer generation who worked for these pensions and their IRAs, and they're going to lose again. And you think people would learn. Yeah, that's true. And so one thing that's encouraging is, the whole idea of reaching out to the younger generation, because I believe, 40 and under, millennials or whatever, they'll be able to witness and see firsthand the system implode on the baby boomers as they're getting ready to retire or already in the midst of, being retired. And it'll be a wake-up call to where I don't think people will trust the system anymore once they see this massive default that's unfolding now. And as I mentioned the other day, the reneging of promises, because all the claims of wealth and promises that were given will be reneged upon. So, but that's just my 2 cents. Rock and roll, Dina, thank you. You look at a 30-year-old, they survived the 2008 crash when they were 20. And that was a pretty prominent time. They realized what happened, and the cat's kind of out of the bag what happened, and it was fraud. And I don't know if they're going to get away with it again. But I'm not taking that chance. I'm going to be ready for it this time. And, I don't want to be doom and gloom and say, oh, the economy's going to crash. This could be a great opportunity for people to capitalize on it.
Yeah, I do agree 100%. And so that's my mind frame. And one reason I'm not into the doom and gloom, and the channel's not dark, and I don't play scary music and stuff like that, just because I believe, with as you mentioned, with every crisis is a great opportunity. And so if you go into it with the mind frame of I can make it through, and I use more of a spiritual background to where I tell myself God has me covered anyway, so I'm going to be all right. I believe I might be at my best or at my peak in the middle of some type of calamity. So that's just my thought process. So I kind of expect that type of action when my back's against the wall. So, but that's just me though. So, but Brian, man, thank you for joining us. It's been great to have you come on and share, man. As I mentioned before, we had Brian the banker who called in a week ago and shared some knowledge. And you guys, in the comment section mentioned that you wanted him back on, so he joined us. And I think, once again, you didn't fail to deliver, my friend. So thank you for joining us, everybody. Other than that, it's been great. I'm going to let Brian let you go, and I'll give it a couple more minutes here, take any questions or whatnot, and we can log off because it's been a long day. As I mentioned, it's been my second interview. But, Brian, thanks for joining us, my friends, and definitely keep us posted. And as I also mentioned, join the Telegram group, and if you ever have any knowledge or anything you want to drop, give me a text or call or drop something in the chat so we can look up and do some research and keep us educated, my friend. Good. All right, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks, good.
Appreciate you.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. So that was solid, man. That was a great some great back and forth. So I want to acknowledge Rock and Roll Dina. I appreciate you for the blessing there. Thank you for that. And so, yeah, there we go, people. That was great, man. You guys wanted them back, so we had them on. And feel free to let me know your thoughts in the chat or whatnot. And for those that didn't get a chance to see it live, if you see the replay of this, leave a comment down below, and we can definitely go back and forth that. And just basically the whole point was to educate you guys, and I think he did a good job of sharing his thoughts and opinions. So go from there. But other than that, what else is happening out here today? Did you guys have a chance to actually see the interview I did earlier with Will Lear from Perpetual Assets? That was another great interview where we were able to cover a lot of interesting things. And so it's interesting how he has a vehicle that people can utilize to take possession of what's theirs to weather the storm that's coming. And so I went back and forth, had a great time with him. So we're going to actually have him and his partner Gus on for another live stream, because I'm partnered with these guys here to basically be able to position the opportunities they have to you and to those that come on board and come into the community. So the goal is, take advantage of all these opportunities, man. This is a great time to do it. So definitely want to keep you guys up to date and do the best I can to, provide for you guys. So other than that, what else we got going on here? So anybody, what's happening in the chat? It says, I came late. So sorry you came late. I think it's Rock and Roll Dita. We had Brian, the viewer from last week, that shared some information via call. So he's the very first viewer / interviewee that I had for this channel. So that was exciting. It says, ACT is what they need to do. It says legal cannabis and football gambling will be big for crypto adoption. I do agree, John, 100%. I do 100%. So John, you mentioned earlier, I saw some about Litecoin payments or whatnot. Any shine a little light on the whole Litecoin payment aspect? Because Litecoin, of course, is this, as people say, the silver of Bitcoin being the gold. Will it hit? And one thing I was thinking earlier that kind of bugs me a little bit is the fact that if Litecoin does become the primary coin that's used for day-to-day transactions, there's no privacy behind it. And so I see that being an issue, because if you can backtrace and see funds and all that stuff like that, see what's going to who and how and where, that right there, it loses the idea of privacy, because anybody will be able to backtrack and see what you're holding, how you're holding. And so I think in order for it to be truly a worldwide used coin, the way that I hope it does become, we can get some privacy added in there. So I think I've heard some talk about them trying to do some developments like that. But I think it needs to happen in order for it to really take off. And I was actually reading an article earlier about how in Europe, some of the powers that be there are concerned with the fact that privacy coins are picking up. And of course, privacy is the kryptonite of government, so they don't like that. And so we need more of that, in my opinion. But it says conflict transactions are in the works. That'd be good, my friend. We could definitely use that. It says need to lay off of it now to work with regulators. Yeah, that's definitely, hopefully something jumps off. But I'm hearing more and more interesting stories behind the scenes of a lot of institutions and the creation of a lot of new companies that are being created for the sole purpose of positioning either their product, assets, or services to the blockchain, or utilizing services through the blockchain and using crypto. So it appears behind the scene that they're setting up for a massive release where they're going to just basically let the caps off the jar, and cryptos will just go through the roof, according to the way all the backstories are lining up to be. So, but we'll see. Says while the dollar is dying. Yeah, that's very true to a dollar. Yeah, so basically the rise in crypto prices nominally is just more of an indicator of the death of the dollar. It's, and as I mentioned before, when cryptos rise, and as a younger generation especially go in that direction, they won't really have any need for Federal Reserve notes other than to use those notes to acquire coins or whatnot. And then the big day will be the day that all the retirement instruments and retirement vehicles are placed in accounts with crypto allocation to it. That's going to be the day that the transfer of wealth will go from the baby boomers right into the hands of the early adopters, and as well as the late adopters as well, in my opinion. Build it to improve itself. Yes, the Lightning Network will scale BTC and Litecoin to the masses. Yeah, I do agree. 100%. For those saving, JM Bullion is a great place to buy precious metal. I go with 1 ounce coins. Yeah, and also for those mentioned about silver, SD Bullion is here in the state of Michigan. So I partner with them and I utilize them. So beneath this video afterwards, there'll be a little advertisement if you're interested in a 10 ounce at spot price, which would be $140 or something right now, which is a lot cheaper than than the last one I actually purchased. So, if you want a 10 ounce bar, click the link, and of course you're supporting the channel if you do that. So, but other than that, that's what it is. So anyway, it's 10:15, people. It's been great. It's been a long evening, long day. We have 2 videos from the day. We have a video earlier and a video tonight. So it gives you guys something to backlog into and watch again if you guys are interested. And more importantly, if you have been watching, give this video a thumbs up and share this information if you find it informative. The biggest thing is to reach new ears so that they can hear a different message and go from there. So other than that, everybody's been great. Have a good evening. I'm logging off. As always, if you guys want to support the channel, support us on Patreon, become a subscriber, or this new feature here they got. You can smart chat or whatever it's called, and got my Bitcoin address up there. If you guys want to donate a small fragment of a Bitcoin, your boy can use that for sure. Other than that, enjoy your evening. I'll see you guys tomorrow night. As always, any news stories that come across your attention, leave in a comment or join a Telegram group and leave me something there, or direct message me there or whatnot, and we go from there. But other than that, everybody be safe, have a good night, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.